if you're going to write, okay, you have to be brave and you have to be honest. And if you step on some toes, well, as we say in Brooklyn, tough noogies.
Welcome to Your Creative Mind. This show is all about tapping into your creativity and using it to build a life you love. You'll hear practical tools, inspiring stories, and conversations with artists, writers, innovators, and changemakers who are doing the work, so you can too. Let's spark your imagination, focus your energy, and create with purpose. Ready? Let's go. Hey there, and welcome to the Your Creative Mind podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I'm very excited to have this week's guest on the show. You know how I feel about authors and playwrights, and today's guest is an author and a playwright and does all sorts of really cool things. And I should have asked Gary Morgenstein or Morgenstein. I should have asked you how to say your name. You're going to correct me. Morgenstein. See, there we go. I wanted to make sure. But let me introduce Gary to you as you're listening to this. I want to ask you to think about what happens when storytelling isn't just about entertainment, but about challenging perspectives, breaking down divisions, and making people feel. That's what Gary Morgenstein does. He writes gripping dystopian fiction and thought-provoking plays that explore love, resilience, and unexpected heroism. His stories don't just reflect society, they challenge it, pushing us to see beyond labels and politics to the heart of what makes us human. In this episode, we're going to explore how bold storytelling can cut through the noise, why broken people sometimes make the best characters, and what it really takes to create work that lingers long after the last page or the final curtain. If you've ever struggled to make your voice heard, this conversation is going to show you why telling your story might just be the most powerful thing you can do. Gary, thanks so much for being on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I'm delighted to be here.
I am, it's funny, in reading up on some of your work, the book He, She, It by Marge Piercy kept coming into my head. And I don't know if you've ever read that book, but it is speculative fiction about a dystopian future in around 2051, where basically there are a bunch of kibbutzim, there are a bunch of little bubbles where people are now living because the air outside of those bubbles, the environment outside of those bubbles has become uninhabitable. And it's about what happens in one particular bubble when other people want to take what they have. And as I was doing the research on some of your work, I kind of was going, there's traces of similarities. And I kind of want to ask you right away, let's jump on in. And I want to ask you, well, the way to put it is, I think your work touches on some of the most complicated and some of the most divisive issues of our time. And so if you had to distill your creative mission into a single powerful sentence, sort of your North Star, what would that sentence be?
Showing that there's more that unites us than divides us.
I think that is great. And it's also something that feels like it's impossible, know? So talk to me a little bit about how you believe that is and how you believe it's possible to actually perhaps get there.
Well, I don't think it's impossible. I think that we can't be governed and influenced too much by our politicians, by the media, by the polarization, because at the end of the day, we're people. And that's how I write my people. I'm not a big fan of hyphenations. I know that's that's in vogue, and I think we focus too much on that rather than the most unrepresented demographic in the country, which is just human beings, flawed human beings. And I think you have to be brave if you're going to write, okay? You have to be brave and you have to be honest. And if you step on some toes, well, as we say in Brooklyn, tough noogies, right? That's too bad. But you have to show, for example, with plays, I always feel like the audience is eavesdropping. They're creeping in the dark and they're overhearing and seeing the way human beings behave when they would not behave like that in front of other people. And I think that's what you have to do. You have to show the honesty of relationships. And yes, I deal with politics in the sense, but my politics is often the window just opening it up. For example, in one of my plays, A Black and White Cookie, it's about the relationship between a conservative African American and a Meshuggah communist Jew, who take on the system together and have to overcome their many differences, including anti-Semitism. But they find that they're just two lonely old guys who want to make a friend. And I think that's what we have to get down to. It's not the stereotypes, the slogans, the caricatures. It's not the finger pointing. It's that we are people. And at the end of the day, we want pretty much the same thing. And you have to show that.
Okay. First of all, I have embraced the pause, and I need to tell you that. And by that, I mean that there are going to be times when you're going to want to say, are you still there? because I'm sort of synthesizing what you're saying, and I'm listening to you, and I'm going, in my most optimistic sort of self, yes, absolutely. I think that we can and probably should reach for that common denominator, that common understanding of us as people. And this notion of I just want to make a friend. I'm gonna put it to you. I'm gonna get political with you right away. I'm gonna put it to you this way. Right after this most recent election, and you and I have not talked politics, so I don't know what your politics are. But right after this most recent election, family members of mine said, okay, he won, and now it's time for all of us to get in the boat and row. And my response was, you know what? I have a constitutionally protected right to disagree with the way my government is being run, and I'm going to do so because it is constitutionally protected. And basically, while I love you, if you don't like it, there's the door. And that's because I feel like when you see something that is challenging or wrong or being done that is hurting others, that I believe you have a duty to stand up and say, no, this is wrong, and I'm going to call it out. So this became a divisive issue between me and my family members. And the reason I'm talking about it is because at the end, they're still my family members and I love them very much. But this piece of it is going to stand between us, and I am not going to get in the boat and row. So in your mind, when you are writing stories like this, whether or not they're plays or fiction, what is your thought about characters, especially who may love each other, but don't like each other very much, in part because some of the things these people stand for go against what the other people believe?
Well, as one of my heroes, Winston Churchill, said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others.
For sure.
For sure, yes. And I have friends. I'm an independent. When paraphrase Groucho, I don't want to belong to any political party that would have me as a member. And I vote for the candidates of all stripes. I don't give money to any political parties. I vote, based on the person.
Mm-hmm.
But when you talk about your character, for example, I deal recently with anti-Semitism in my works, which is the window into the human relationship. And I think, for example, of that, the example of hatred and bigotry. Now, I think when you write your characters, you have to be respectful of your characters. You have to be honest and let them show how they feel. It's not up to me to tell the audience or the reader how to think. We have too much of that. People say, well, you should think this, you should think that. That's not, I don't think that's the job of the artist. I think we have to respect the audience's mind and their intelligence. I like to think if someone bought my book, they have to be somewhat intelligent because my books are 500 pages each in the trilogy. So you have to let them make their own judgments. And I think there's going to be things that they say that the audience doesn't agree with. There are things they do and the way they behave that I don't agree with. But you have to accept it, accept the total tapestry. Someone once said, we are not of a kind. We are not one thing. And I think you take the good with the bad. Obviously, we all have our red line. Okay, if you believe in this, well, then go away. Don't darken my door. I want nothing to do with you. I understand that, especially nowadays. But I think you're going to have disagreements with people, and I know in the wake of this election, we've all had those. And people have lost friendships because of that. I've lost friendships or turned away from people because they turned away from me after October 7th in a way I did not think was justified or humane. But we still have to press on. We still have to find ways to reach out because we are, all on this little parcel of land for this minute period of time in the universe. And I think it's our job as artists, which is focus on artists, not as human beings, because some people don't think they're the same thing. So as writers, to show a light. And I think that's what's really important, to give hope. Yes, it's dark. It's ugly. You want to punch this person in the nose, but there's got to be a way forward. And I hope I'm not trying to change the world. I'm trying to make people think for a moment and look at a different point of view. And with a black and white cookie, again, it premiered in Maryland a few years ago. Outside DC, won the Broadway World Award. Anyway, the guy, the actor who played the conservative African American, who's Republican now, Melvin is a union organizer, so he couldn't be any more different. And he said, during the rehearsal process, he didn't agree with the character, but at least he listened. At least he saw where he was coming from. And I think if in our art, we can let people see where the other person is coming from, why they believe it. It's such a slippery slope now, because nowadays, if you try to explain why someone thinks this way, explain why someone voted this way, it's, well, what do you mean you do? We've had that from all sides. It doesn't matter, what your ideology, your party is. And I think just to take a breath and say, okay, that's why they believe this. And that's hard. And what I also try to do in my work is I use humor. People are sometimes surprised how much humor there is in some of the darker moments, because we're people and we need to laugh. First of all, you need to give the audience a chance to catch their breath. You can't be all, grim and boulders falling from the sky. You have to let them lighten up a little bit. And I think I had a reading of a black and white cookie a couple weeks ago, actually in the theater in Silver Spring outside Washington. It was a fundraiser. And the audience, there was a talkback. And the preponderance of the audience was echoing some of the things you said, like, well, I could never be friends with someone who believed like that. And finally, after like 40 minutes, maybe I was grumpy, I didn't have a glass of wine yet. I said, did you see the humor? Did you all were laughing at in the audience? And that's what we have to do. We have to maybe smile a little more, laugh a little more. And that's not being Pollyanna. Believe me, I'm very, very far from that. But it's just taking a breath and trying to respect. And that's really important.
It's fascinating to listen to what you're saying. First of all, I lived in the DC area for many, many years. I'm a relatively recent transplant to New York City. So when you say things like, oh, this was in Maryland in Silver Spring, I lived a few miles from Silver Spring for 30 years. So I'm like, oh, which theater was it? But anyway, I think the thing that in listening to what you're saying, the thing that strikes me is that we are sitting at a precipice of sorts, in that when you have the one side having just incredible marketing people, that's really what it is, and you have the other side sort of going, okay, we suck at marketing. And what that means to me is that one side is getting its message out there with sound bites and the other one isn't. These kinds of disagreements become very challenging to be a part of. And so in this play, in Black and White Cookie, which I love the title, by the way, I haven't read the play, but I love the title. When you have characters like this that are really at odds, I guess I'm wondering, in this situation, with plays, with dystopian fiction, a lot of this stuff is feeling really close to being real. And so, what I want to know from you is, in your writing, what's a future scenario that you think might even be closer than we realize?
Well, in my dystopian trilogy, which begins with A Mound Over Hell, it starts in 2098 after America and the West have lost World War III to the Islamic Empire. America is surrounded. Democracy is dead. We're governed by uh, a nanny state called the family, led by grandma. So things like social media is banned under the anti-narcissism laws, which is not such a bad idea, actually, maybe in 2025. And baseball, discredited baseball associated with the old great America who led us into this catastrophe, begins its final season ever at Amazon Stadium, the ballpark now known as Yankee Stadium. But ultimately, the boys and girls of summer save the world. And ultimately, there will be some uneasy peace. And I wanted to, I was looking to, you know what it's like as a writer, how the ideas come to you. People ask that all the time. So this idea, my wife and I were having Sunday breakfast, everything bagels with a schmear, listening to the Beatles. And the idea popped into my head. America has lost World War III, and because I wanted to gut punch this country. When you write dystopian fiction, you can't be a prophet. I think you're really losing. You're really wait, sorry, I'm just letting my cat out. You're really you don't want to prophesize and predict what's going to happen in the future because you look stupid. It's so easy. And in my novels, never once do I mention, Trump or nothing. There is nothing like that. I make up the future from like 2030 going forward. What you want to do is make it plausible. And I did not, and you want to say, the reader can say, oh, I can see that happening. And I didn't want to do, you were talking about the Marge Piercy novel, which I have not read, but I didn't want to do something about, the environment, because that's been done to death. And if it's going to have World War III, okay, so who should America fight? Well, Russia, that's ridiculous. That's been done to death. China, well, that's maybe, but that's boring. But Islam, the clash between Islam and the West has been going for 1,300 years. It's still going on. And I thought on a broad canvas, especially culturally, especially the chasms that exist between both sides, that is the most interesting. And that will bring up the most sort of hatred on both sides. But I wanted to focus on how ordinary people become heroes. And to me, that was the most interesting thing writing the book, is how this regular folks, I mean, a baseball historian, a failed art teacher, a dentist, this orphan girl who escapes to America because as an illegal immigrant, and then showing the Islamic side. It's governed by Sharia, but there are many Muslims who are not happy with the Sharia, and so I want to show what that would be like. And I did research. I was very careful. Only one person has ever accused me of Islamophobia, not because I pulled my punches, because I didn't. I made it very honest and clear what that would be like, and I made the thing about bigotry and hatred, as we know, it just escalates, and like wars, and the tone and the names that both sides call each other, and here they're called the Muslims are called Allahs, even though there's no Muslims left in North America, and they're the crusade. The Christians are crusaders. There's virtually no Jews. Israel was the first nation destroyed, and Jews had to go underground when they were blamed for the war. But I want to show how everyone could come together, what life would be like, and make it feasible, except creating a lot. And another thing about dystopian literature is that if you're really going to build a world, and I really build a world here with a lot of rules in the sense that governs how that world behaves, then you have to be consistent. And you also have to make sure, we know how the readers, we all do, of course, someone's going to come to a book with 2025 eyes. Okay, that's it. You're going to see it like that. So when I had social media banned under the anti-narcissism laws, okay, it's not because, the descendants of Zuckerberg and Musk were misbehaving. Nothing to do with that. It's because in this world, the most important thing is family and friendships and love. It's post-woke. No one is ever referenced with their ancestry or anything, any of the hyphenations. So, but social media doesn't fit in because mainly, I don't want to shock everyone out there, but the 1,000 friends on Facebook really ain't your friends. I know. We should have a pause for people going, oh my God, what do you mean? What do you mean? They're really not your friends. So this society wants it to be based on real relationships. There's no cell phones. You need a permission to make a phone call only in an emergency, because if there's an emergency, you should know about it. If it's your family, you have the post office delivering mail 4 times a week. So it's 4 times a day, sorry. So it's the society which is essentially totalitarian, but it's built on individual relationships where you actually have to think for yourself. So social media influences would be anathema. You decide what you want. There's no celebrity worship. That's, again, anathema. There's no opinion journalism. In fact, there's very little journalism. The entertainment industry has been turned upside down. But then you need to, if you have the rules, you have to obey them and you have to justify them. For example, one of the main characters gets pregnant because she's an unwed mother. Okay. So I had to think, well, in this society, what would be the role of an unwed mother? It would be looked with great disfavor because the whole thing is about families, right? But you would not have abortions either because 17 million Americans died in the war. So it's like restocking the breed. So then she would have to go find an abortion clinic, much like they used to have back in those horrible days. But that's what I'm saying. You have to obey your laws. And sometimes you say, what's wrong, schmuck? Why did you write that? You're making things difficult for yourself. But I don't want the reader to bust me on it. I want my world to be credible to them and for them to feel comfortable.
It's interesting, that last thing you said, for them to feel comfortable. I'm distinctly uncomfortable with that world, but it's a dystopian fiction. So it's supposed to be, to me, a little bit uncomfortable. What's interesting, though, in listening to you, I'm thinking about group theory, right? And group theory says that you really can't effectively be in groups larger than 144 people. That's about all that our brains can comprehend as far as individualizing people in a group and being able to have actual relationships with them. So when you're writing your work, and of course you can have many more characters in a book than you can in a play, what are you looking for in the characters that are going to be prominent with respect to something like group theory when you can have millions of people involved in the story?
Well, I want them to be interesting. That's first and foremost. They have to interest me. And again, it sounds precious, but the characters just come. And the door to the other side opens, and that would be another episode just discussing where the door leads to what's on the other side. For example, in the book, baseball's in its final season, and 2 great players from the past come, and they're Ty Cobb and Mickey Mantle. And when I first started writing it, I was trying to think of, well, who's going to come back? Which great player is going to come back? And there was a moment when I had Reggie Jackson, and he was boring. He didn't interest me. And then I wrote a little bit with Babe Ruth, and he overwhelmed everyone. So it's the characters come and go. And then the wonderfulness is when characters are minor roles. There's a Muslim fisherman who lives in Spain, becomes very, very big deal in my novels, as are Mustafa. And in the first draft, he had a minor scene, and I thought, all right, he's gone. And then I wrote a scene where he goes back to home and goes to his family, and that was interesting. And he has two sons who eventually are sort of like Cain and Abel, or more like probably Jacob and Esau. And that was like a total surprise to me. Or my little orphan girl, Clary, who is abused in a orphanage outside Barcelona, and I never knew what she would develop into, and it was like, wow, you're a ball of fire. And she, takes on contours and eventually takes on some of the properties of robots, raising the question, can robots have souls? And so the surprises of characters is, to me, the most wonderful thing of all when you write. And again, this sounds very precious, but characters take over. How many times have we written scenes and they're just like who wrote this crap? The characters say, well, you really think I do that? Really? And you just step back and they take over. And you try to explain to people, well, isn't that in your head? And well, you think it would be, but it isn't. So it's the whole magical process about creativity. And when I finished the book, I was really sad when I finished the last one. I didn't think I'd be this moved, and really just, I was like in a period of mourning for a while when I finally said goodbye to them.
I completely understand. You finish the book and you go, but wait, it can't be over. Wait. And I totally get it. And it's interesting to me to hear you talk about the characters. Sort of, my characters often take a left turn at Albuquerque. They kind of go, whoa, and then I'm sort of playing catch up sometimes. But you said it, and so now I have to ask about it. That open door from the other side, those moments where you're in flow, and all of a sudden 5 hours have passed, and you lift your head up, and you're like, oh, I've been writing this whole time, and suddenly it's dark, and I didn't even realize it. Yeah. Talk to me about that process for you.
Well, I guess like every writer, I have the anxiety each day when I look at the blank page. Philip Roth said something smart about that. And I think that so much that people have said about writing is just nonsense. But Philip Roth said you should never write yourself out. You should always keep something in the tank to start the next day. Mm-hmm. So I try to remember that, but not always successful. I sit on my had a corporate job for many years, and now I like my office is my easy chair with an end table for my coffee or whatever, and I have my dog who sits on my lap, and he's my muse, and I just go into it, and for however long it takes. But the thing, as you know, about being a writer, it's 24/7. That's it. You keep. 3 o'clock in the morning, you scribbling. Oh, wow. Sometimes you wake up the next morning and it's gibberish. You say, well, okay, maybe not. Maybe that wasn't so insightful. But you're always living it in a way. When my wife and I were married, a second marriage, which is, as some people know, is the triumph of hope over experience. And she decided that she was going to sit in the room while I wrote. I said, well, are you sure? She said, yeah. Some writing, and then she was looking at me in alarm. She said, what's wrong? I said, why? What do you mean? She says, well, your expression looks horrible. So that's not me, that's the characters. And at that point, I said, "Could you please, leave me alone now?" So that's my rule. You don't no, you're no more coming in the room, sitting there watching me. No, 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 no. Because you talk to yourself. That's it. I mean, you're talking out the lines, or maybe just to yourself, depending on the situation, and you just embrace it. And I don't know if anyone ever explained where creativity came from. I'm sure there's been a lot written about it, but I don't know how valid it is because, first of all, I always thought it would be wonderful. Would be a great invention if you could plug into your thoughts as they're coming into your head to get them down on paper, rather than waiting to write them. Right, instantaneously, how the dialogue is coming. That would be a marvel.
Well, I think that there's something like that now. I wrote 4 of my books walking in the woods with my dog, my wonderful dog Hatha, who's no longer with us. But
Sorry.
I wrote voice to, oh, that's okay. He lived a very good life. But I wrote 4 books walking in the woods with him back when I lived in Greenbelt, Maryland, and wrote it voice to text, actually. So it was, as I was writing the dialogue, I was literally writing it into a Google Doc. And that's exactly how I write a lot of my stuff, because not plays, because there's too much formatting involved. But it's interesting. You mentioned the machinations writers go through in order to actually get the story out. And I guess what I'm wondering is, in these moments, you live in Brooklyn. You sound like you're a lifelong, at least New Yorker, perhaps
Yes.
lifelong Brooklynite. There are so many stories, and I sound like a TV show, and I don't remember which one. There's so many stories in this city. Just sitting down and having a coffee somewhere will get you all sorts of ideas. But you seem to have chosen to write about very specific and very heavy topics. Now, you've also said that you look for the humor.
Yes.
I would love it if you would look into how you strike that balance. As a writer, as a storyteller, you did mention, I know, that people need a break, but there is a flow to your writing that I would love to ask you to explore, that you don't let it go too far into the darkness before you have a joke, and you don't let it get too funny before you bring back the real. Can you talk a little bit about that balancing act as you're crafting your stories?
Well, like many writers, many, a significant amount, I had an unhappy childhood. I grew up in a very dysfunctional family. And so there was a lot of yelling and screaming and threatening to drive the car off the Triborough Bridge and, fun things like that. So I had to find some escape, and I found writing. But I early on realized that if I just processed the anger and the unhealthiness around me into my writing and let that seep in, I would have no respite. So I came up with using humor. And I think also my heritage, being Jewish. We've been around thousands of years. We've had to deal with adversity a long time. So it's kind of second nature to step back and make a joke. And I think people do that too, probably more than they get credit for. Won't be just hysterical. You want to break it up. You want to laugh. You want to smile, because it becomes overwhelming. And I think I like to bring that into my books, that is very human, to both to feel a lot of different things.
That is definitely sort of the human experience. We're not Tinkerbell, who can only feel one thing at one time. And yet you'd mentioned earlier, oh, people want love. They want to feel a sense of belonging. And I want to reference one of your pieces, Walking Charlie.
Yes.
I'm vegan, so I'm animals first kind of person. Always sort of have to put that out there. you have a struggling business owner and sort of a political refugee brought together by this dog, and Charlie feels like the emotional anchor of the story. Can you talk a little bit how you chose that as the emotional anchor of the story, and how your creativity informs those emotional touchstones or beats in your stories?
Well, I also have a dog, my beloved dog, my pug. And so we're very connected. Like I said, he's my muse and he's very special to me. And I think if, unless you're a dog owner or a pet, you can't really appreciate it. You go, oh, that's nice, but you don't really get what it's like when they sleep in the bed every night, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's something different that people who aren't, pet parents just can't quite fathom that. Um, and Charlie brings them together because they're his owner, Seth, is in the park, and Alondra steps in his poop and claims that he ruined her shoe. And that starts the connection. And Charlie is an underlying theme in the book. He's in the play. Sorry, his connection to Seth and Seth's roommate Joey, and some of the health issues that Charlie goes through, and how he represents to Seth his late wife. This is a very strong connection, and it is kind of a modern love story. Again, I don't write sex in my plays or books. The closest I get is to maybe mentioning it happened. I think it's way over the top. That if you really want that, they have websites, but you're not going to find it, in my work. Also, like, for example, I think there's way too much obscenities and way too much reliance, certainly in movies, on CGI. It's laziness. It takes the place of character development and plot. But I wanted to find writing relationships. At some point, they're going to get gooey. So I was really proud that this never quite got gooey. Alondra has come to America with her daughter Daniela, escaping the dictatorship, and her husband is in jail. And then he shows up. So there's a lot of that. And it looks at the immigrant, the immigrant experience, which we all have. I'm sure the preponderance of the people listening know what I'm talking about. And it also touches on the migrant crisis and how that's dealt with. But I raise the issue, but not knowing there's no scenes in, the Department of Homeland Security. Okay, it's not like that. It's the politics is how it relates to the people. And that's what I focus on in Walking Charlie.
As an immigrant myself, I get that. I get and my family immigrated when I was a child, so I have a slightly different experience than coming here as an adult. But your work challenges the norms, I would say. And I would love to ask you about that, uh, especially your plays, because I wrote a political play called A Slice of Democracy about a woman who, as an older woman in her 70s, who for the very first time was going to get to vote. And there'd been a snafu with her paperwork, and all of a sudden, really honestly, for the very first time, she was going to be able to vote in the election.
Beautiful.
And but that actually is what happened to my family. We didn't become citizens for a very long time because of paperwork snafus. But my point is, I didn't get to see the premiere of the play, but the director emailed me and she said, I wanted to let you know, after one of the performances, an audience member came to me with tears in his eyes because that was his story. There had been some paperwork snafu, and for the longest time, they couldn't figure out his citizenship. He could never vote. And he was thrilled because he was going to be able to vote in this coming election. and he cried because of it. It really affected him. And so that makes me wonder, with your plays especially, since they're immediate, since people might be there to see the reaction, have you ever gotten feedback from a reader or an audience member that made you realize, yeah, my work is making a difference? And if so, what was it?
Oh, well, yes, I'm proud to say, because I've often had talkbacks. And I wrote a play some years ago called "The Tomato Can't Grow in the Bronx," won a Perry Award in New Jersey, and was at the chain theater in Manhattan, and it's about a Jewish working class family in the in 1968 who try to want to leave the Bronx to find their dream home in the suburbs. Well, good luck with that. And it's a dysfunctional family. Forgive the redundancy, but when we had talkbacks, and there was I loved it because it was a diverse audience. Okay, I mean, just totally diverse. And people said, "Yeah, well, that's like my grandmother. Oh, that's like my father. Oh, man, you got my mother." And that was a wonderful feeling because, again, it goes back to what I believe that I was seeing, black and white and Hispanic and Asian, Jew and Gentile, whatever, having the same experience with their families. And I love that. And I love that you could touch people on that level. And that was, I thought that was really wonderful. It makes, when you're a novelist, you never know what people are really thinking unless they reach out to you. But as a playwright, as you know, there's the immediacy, which could be sometimes terrifying, right?
Uh-huh.
Right? You're there and then you're saying, why is everyone quiet? And someone will say, well, because they're taking in the play. Well, oh yeah, or they're bored, or they're,
Right. As long as they're not checking their iPhones, then
yes,
then
yes,
then
we've
you're
had
good.
that, right? Yes. But so there is the immediacy. And it's wonderful. To me, one of the most wonderful sounds is laughter in the theater. We have, in our world, we need far more laughter and we need far more joy. And if you could bring that to someone for the admission of a ticket for an hour and a half, 2 hours, that's a hell of a contribution. A hell of a contribution.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because I was on a panel recently about sort of the comparison contrast between writing novels versus writing scripts versus writing screenplays, and I actually mentioned that notion that a play is not done until it's up on stage. A
Right.
screenplay is not done until you see the movie form, because it's sort of the transitional phase between what the writer has envisioned and then what the audience gets to experience on stage. And that notion of the script itself being something transitional as a storytelling medium, it's surprised some of the people who were at this discussion. I was a panelist and we had an audience, because we don't tend to think of that. So I guess the question I would love to ask you, as someone who works in both, what has writing in one taught you that maybe surprised you about the other, and vice versa?
Well, I think the most important thing is they're two different mediums, two very different mediums. And you shouldn't act like they're the same or
Mm-hmm.
even that they're close to each other, other than the need for character and plot and that. Um, Being a novelist, of course, your name's the only one they're out there, good or bad. That's you. You have no one else to. But the beauty of theater is the collaboration,
Mm-hmm.
and that people bring your work to life and invest it with a perspective that you might not have had. Because it's wonderful when you work with directors and actors. They say, well, maybe the character, as they create backstories that you never did, or they'll ask you questions. Why? Yeah, I don't know. You want to make something up. You don't want to insult everyone because they know you're lying. And how different actors have different interpretations and directors, and it's just such a wondrous, magical experience. I think I was a novelist before I was a playwright, but writing novels is very lonely. Um, Being a playwright is wonderful. We've all had our experience that were not so wonderful, which we can leave out, but but for the most part, it's really it's when you see it, the lights come up and you see it. To me, the best thing is when I'm watching a performance and I'm not flipping the pages of the script, because that's a level of anxiety. I know. Reading along as they're saying. When I'm not doing that, I know that this is a very good production because I have comfort, because I have calm, because I have confidence in what they're doing. And as a playwright, I think you have to let it go. I know I've heard so many stories. Well, I'm not changing a word or any. I mean, it's ridiculous. Then why did you write a play if you're not going to accept that something might not work, that someone might have a better idea, that when you write, sometimes the tendency is to be a little insecure. I mean, of course, writers are never insecure, but a little insecure, and you don't know if just the expression would take the place of the line, right? Or the exchange of looks between characters is much more powerful than the dialogue, because that's theater. And you have to give it up. You have to say, wow, they're just looking at each other. Yeah, that's great. And you have to go with the flow because it's collaboration and it belongs to you. It belongs to them, not you. It belongs to the audience, not you. When I've done talkbacks, the question I hate the most. So what did you mean when this, and I try to do this as politely as possible. I say, well, I really would rather hear what you think because you're the audience. I did my job. I'm very interested to hear your opinion.
It's so interesting to me to hear you say that. I think right now of who owns the rights, right? Because when the guild negotiated how these things would be done, how plays would be uh, published, how things would be done from script to theater, the playwright owns their script, and you do have to ask permission. I don't know too many playwrights who say, I'm not changing a word, but the theater is required to ask for permission to change things around in a script legally. Whereas a screenplay, they get to do what they want once they bought it. So I guess I'm wondering with this notion of collaboration, and I agree with you that collaboration is very, very crucial. When someone says, I'd like to change this in one of your scripts, but you disagree with the change they want to make. How do you navigate that?
I try to give them the benefit of the doubt, unless it's like factually wrong or just so egregious. If someone will explain to me why, then as often as not, I'll say, okay, let's try it. I'll go with it. I like to go with the flow. I like to play the hand.
Yeah. I'm thinking about that and I'm going, that's amazing. And that sounds like someone who's lived a life and goes, yeah, it's all about working together. So talk to me about work for you. And I don't mean work as in what you did professionally, but in this situation, what is a good writing day? What is a good work day for you in this? I don't know how you write, put the pen down or close the computer and go, I did well today. What is that like for you and what does it mean to have done that?
Oh, it's a rush. Like today, I just finished a scene, though I'm writing a new play, and the previous draft was problematic. In other words, it sucked. And you have to admit that, right? That's a big thing when you're a writer, is admitting you sometimes you just write crap. And you just have to let hit delete. But this time I fixed it. And it was like, that doesn't mean it's perfect, but it's like, oh, right. That's how it should be. Or that's as closer to how it should be. And it's a joy. It's orgasmic in a way. It's like creative orgasm when that happens. And then you want to close up the laptop. See, that's it. Okay. Rest on a high note. Not where you're like, oh God, what am I going to do? I can't figure this out. No, that's bad. That's not healthy. No, rest on a high note, because you know tomorrow that's going to happen. you're gonna have that problem, right? So it's going to come back again.
It's a cycle for sure. And to your point earlier about leaving scenes and sort of finishing up what you're doing. And I think, as you said, Philip Roth, who said that, what works for me is I finish the scene, but I start the next page and I go, I'm going to write about whatever X is, and just one sentence to remind me where I'm going with the story so I don't forget. Do you have any tricks if someone were coming to you as a new playwright or a new author and wanted to know what's the bit of advice you'd give to someone who's just starting out and wants to do this, but is probably feeling like they can't or they're afraid to begin?
Well, I might scare them a little bit because I'd say it's hard work. And we know people who have, come to us and said, oh, I have a great idea for wait, may I just let my dog in? Wait, don't go away. Come on, stop walking. Okay. Sorry.
Don't worry about it at all.
Okay. He was barking. Now it'd be a lot quieter. People say, oh, I have a great idea for a story. All right. As our people would say, Zeitgeist, write the story. But remember, it's a lot of editing. I've known people who thought that the first draft, now they're going to shop it around. I said, are you sure maybe you wouldn't want to take a look at it again? My last novel, I dug out the piece, was 600 pages, no, 700 pages in Microsoft, in Microsoft Word. And I edited it 10 times until I got it right. And I think that's what you've got to be prepared for, the editing. You've got to be prepared for eating your young, right? You got to say, okay, I'm sorry, but you got to die now.
Right.
I'm erasing you, any trace of your existence. And you got to be able to tell yourself that didn't work. You have to be honest with yourself and celebrate when it does work. And I think that's what anyone who's going to get into this, but most importantly, you have to be honest. You have to write stories that you feel honestly, that you tell honestly, with characters who behave like people, who do wrong things, who overcome, who talk like they shouldn't and embarrass you with their ideas sometimes. But you have to be willing to put that out there and not flinch and not let people tell you, well, are you sure that's really pushing the envelope? Well, that's what we do for thousands of years, probably longer than that. Writers have held up a mirror to society and said, this is wrong. What are you going to do about it? Because we're going to do something about it. And we've led the charge and we've shined the light and we've said, let's change this. Science fiction, my books are dystopian science fiction. Science fiction is a broad canvas, many different genres and subgenres. But back in the 50s, there was, it was kind of derogated science fiction, the paperback novels. Yet they were among the writers, and the stories were on the cutting edges of societal problems, from rights, from civil rights to the threat of nuclear war onward. I mean, they're just some of the best American writers wrote science fiction, and I think that's what writers do. But it doesn't work if the characters are the writer's avatar. doesn't work. It doesn't work if you're pointing fingers. That's in my opinion. You've got to show gray. You've got to show gray because it's far more powerful when you do that. I really strongly believe that. You must, our politicians can polarize. The media loves to polarize. If it bleeds, it leads. They love all that. But we've got to show a little more than that. And I think that you must have, so I think someone said, good versus evil is farce, but good versus good is tragedy. And I think that's the key.
I have so many thoughts going through my head right now. I'm fascinated because immediately I went to Othello, and I challenge you to come up with how Iago is a good guy because wow, is he evil and petulant and jealous and vile. And in thinking to myself, I really am I'm going, I know Othello pretty well, and I'm going, how in that play is Iago at all a good guy? Yet that is definitely a tragedy. So I'm going to have to go back and think about it. I agree with you. I do agree with you that a mustachio twirling villain is boring, for
Yes.
example. I want I was just talking about this to another author I was interviewing. So if you're listening to this, you're going to hear about Titanic again. So Billy Zane's character in the movie Titanic was just the most boring villain. He literally stole a baby out of a woman's arms so he could get in a lifeboat. You don't get much more villainous than that, right? And and therefore was a boring villain to me. I kind of rolled my eyes and went, ugh, whatever. So what's interesting to me is when you have people who are conflicted, and looking at your body of work, a lot of your characters are conflicted.
Yes.
And something that I too had a very challenging, we'll call it dysfunctional, immigrant family childhood. If you're listening to this podcast, I've talked about my being a child abuse survivor many times, so we're not going to get into that. But to me, characters who have some sort of redeeming grace, even when they're doing awful things, are the most interesting. So I'm going to ask you a strange question. Out of all the things that you've ever written, who is your favorite bad guy?
I would say that in A Fastball for Freedom, and a little bit in The Dugout, the $3 are a Mount Over Hell, A Fastball for Freedom, and A Dugout piece. You see a little baseball theme there, but the character who is the head of the Islamic secret police, who does what he's told, but is trying to find a way out of it. And the Islamic Empire is ruled by the Grand Mufti. There's a civil war, an incipient civil war brewing with his Grand Mufti's son, Abdullah, who wants to bring enlightenment to the Islamic Empire, to the Muslim people. And in the middle is this guy who is not above torturing people, but yet he doesn't think it's the right thing. And he can't just stop because he has a young daughter who's about 10 years old, and what would they do to her? But yet he's working for Abdullah, somewhat, hedging his bets, trying to find a way out of it all. So I wouldn't say he's a good guy, okay? But he is conflicted, and he is human. And we must remember that even the people we don't like are humans. A silly segue. There was a movie back in the early 2000s, I think 2002, 2003, I just saw recently, called The Bunker, German film, showing the last days of Hitler. And the New York Times gave it a bad review because they said, well, they showed Hitler eating ravioli and they made him seem too human. And my point is that Hitler was a monster. Okay. But monsters are warped human beings. These are not aliens who came down from the sky. And we have to show them as horrible human beings to show so we understand how the horribleness, the evil morphs and grows. And that's really important. We can't act as if someone has implanted evil. Humans implanted evil. And most importantly of all, good people. Good people are the ones who look away and let evil flourish. In the wake of October 7th, I've thought often about a quote by Martin Luther King, another one of my heroes, who said, "In the end, we do not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." And I think we have to show that. We have to understand that. We have to get good people to pay attention. And it's not tolerable to look away or to remain silent when faced with evil.
That was beautifully said, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
I don't have anything else to say. Like that. Yes, what you said. Yeah, I'll be honest with you, Gary. I could have you here for another 3 hours
We'll
just
have to
chatting
get
about this.
coffee one day.
That's right. We're both in Brooklyn. We'll have to go get coffee. Yeah. No, but I hope you'll come back because I would love
Love
to
to.
talk with you further about this notion of where the stories come from because it's something I work my for lack of a better term day job since I own my own business. I work in helping people access their innate creativity. That's
Mm.
what I do. And what's interesting to me about what you said, you kind of went, "Oh, that's a whole other podcast episode, but we could talk about what's on the other side of that door." I would love to get you back and really just hone in on that because it's a fascinating topic. But again, I know that you have a day to get back to. So I would just love to ask you a couple more questions.
Sure.
They're all questions I ask everybody. And the first one is if somebody wants to know more about you, Gary Morgenstein, and your work, your plays, your books, your novels, your short stories, everything, where do they go to find you?
Well, I don't have a website because it was too overwhelming to keep it up. So and I'm not techie. So
Got
I
it.
guess my books are on at the publisher bhcpress.com, and I'm on Facebook as Gary Morgenstein and Instagram and at Writer Gary on Twitter, and you could Google me, and I think most of it is will come up.
Awesome. Yeah, I will. I will also put those Instagram and Facebook, et cetera, links in the show notes so that because I know people learn differently. So I like to ask people to say it and also put it in the show notes for people who are more visual or tactile so that people can find you. And also, I'm going to ask you to send me a couple of the covers of your plays so we can get, or your books, so we
Yeah.
can get those in the show notes as well. And thank you for giving that out so that I can put that in the show notes and people who want to find out more about your work, especially baseball fans. I love that baseball plays such a role in your
Yes.
books.
Yes. Well, to be it's not as easy as it used to be a baseball fan. But to be a baseball fan, you need to be sentimental, and we don't have a sentimental society anymore. But
I
I keep it up.
I was a Tigers fan in the
Oh,
80s. I know all about up and down because I grew up in Michigan. So yeah, it's interesting. I have my own softball glory moment story from when
oh,
I played softball one summer. And what's interesting, that was not 50, but I would say 45 years ago, 48 years ago, something like that. And I still look at that moment fondly that I did something right in softball one time, almost 50 years ago, but it's still something that feels very
sure.
powerful to me. So, but anyway, one of these days I'll talk about it on the show. It was a moment that felt really like I did it. I felt like Rocky in the movie at the top of those stairs in Philadelphia. Anyway, but we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about you. The last two questions. Here's the penultimate question, and it is, what is it that gets you up in the morning? And I don't mean your alarm.
Well, one of the things is one of our cats tries to open the door to the bedroom. But because I'm somewhat observant, so I like to think that I'm alive, and the day I have to show faith that being alive and do something about it.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah, and it's funny because we no longer have a dog, but we have cats, and they all sleep in the bed with us. And one of them is a younger kitten, and his current obsession is my toes. So so that's often what gets me up in the morning. But I agree with you that reminding yourself that you're alive, and that means, I ride motorcycles, and we say to each other, keep the shiny side up and the rubber side down. And the reason we say that is because, that's when you get to keep riding. That's when you get to keep living, is you're alive. You put your feet on the floor, you get up in the morning, you go have your cup of coffee or tea or whatever it is, and you remind yourself that you're still here. And that's my next tattoo, actually. I'm going to put it on my inside of my wrist that just says, I'm still here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really very much appreciate that, reminding yourself that you're alive. Yeah. So here is the last question before I let you go, Gary. If you had an airplane, environmentally friendly, of course, that could skywrite anything for the whole world to see, what would you say?
Oh, laugh more.
I love that. I love that. That's great. My husband was a clown in the circus, and he is a clown and a variety entertainer and comedian, a la the vaudevillians, and he makes me laugh all the time. And that's what he does for a living, is he makes people laugh or wows them with walking on 8-foot stilts and juggling fire and whatever. But yeah, laughter is crucial to happiness, to any kind of well-lived life, I think. So I agree with you completely there. Thank you for saying that.
Yes, it's you got to laugh, and if you're in doubt, put on a Marx Brothers movie. You'll feel much better.
Or from my corner, watch Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Yes, Abbott and Costello. Oh yes.
They're my favorite. I grew up on them, and their version of Who's On First is probably my favorite thing in the world. So anyway, speaking of baseball, Gary, once again, thank you so much for joining me on the show. What a wonderful conversation. And I hope you'll come back and talk about that hot seat of creativity and where it all comes from.
I will. Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you everyone for listening.
This has been Isolde Trachtenberg and Gary Morgenstein on the Your Creative Mind podcast. As always, I remind you that this show is brought to you by Brain FM, which is my favorite brain training app. I love it so much. It's currently letting me prepare to do my taxes. Yay. Which I love, because otherwise I will run screaming like my hair's on fire. If you're listening to this, remember to support your show. Remember to love your life. And as always, be bold, be creative, and most of all, be kind. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're new, and it would mean the world to me if you told a friend about it. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright 2025. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope.